What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining me on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we are working on a 2020 BMW 330i xDrive. Today on the 330, we are going to be covering a couple different things under the engine bay. We are going to be breaking up these videos into a 4-part series, where we are going to be covering the valve cover or valve cover gasket replacement, the high pressure fuel pump replacement, fuel injectors replacement, and the van nose solenoid actuator replacements. For the purpose of today's video, we are going to be focusing slowly on how to replace the fuel injectors. These are going to be tied in a little bit to the high pressure fuel pump, but the focus will be the injectors, how to replace them, and how to seat them back in the engine. It's going to be a little bit different than the N55 or S55 variants, but the idea remains the same. One thing you don't have to worry about is there is no calibration for these once you go to replace them. The only thing you may want to consider is resetting adaptations and or clearing codes if you have a misfire due to a bad fuel injector, which can happen. If you are doing this job, again, it's a little bit involved. I do recommend you replace them all. Just because one has failed doesn't mean that the rest won't. Usually if one's going, then the next one's gonna go, and then the next thing you know, you're doing it 4 times. Plus, not to mention the one-time use hardware involved with the job. Just get it done all at once, and then you're gonna be set for at least another 70 to 100,000 miles. This should be a pretty straightforward job otherwise, so before we get into it, let's take a look at some of the tools we're gonna need. All right, for the fuel injectors, we have our main tool here. This is going to be CTA 3766, which is going to help us remove our injectors from the cylinder head. We have a torque wrench, 3/8 drive ratchet, 1/4-inch ratchet, some adapters to convert those, and some extensions. We have a 17mm flared wrench for our fuel line. We have a right angle pick, a flathead screwdriver, and a set of adjustable pliers should we need that with the fuel line or something like that. As far as sockets go, we have an E6 and an E8. Those are going to be 2 big main sockets for that fuel line. We have a couple Torx up top here. We're going to be overlapping again these DIYs. So we have a T20 all the way to a T30, just in case. Magnet tool, some dielectric grease. We have a Sharpie brake clean, which we'll need. Electric ratchet, if I didn't mention that already. And then some compressed air and a vacuum is going to come in handy to clean out the crevices around the valve cover, get any dust or debris out of the way. And I think we've had a little critter living in our car, so we're definitely going to have to get after it with that. As always, some shop towels are going to come in handy. Definitely watch the DIY the whole way through. Some parts are going to be out of the way that maybe don't need to be because these 4 videos are overlapping, so don't be alarmed. We're going to do our best to keep it focused on the injectors. Now with that, let's go ahead and get started. Our first step for all of these is going to be to disconnect the battery. We're going to undo the negative terminal first, 10mm socket. If you want to be extra safe, you can put some towel or something in between these so they don't make contact. And then just so we don't forget, we are going to either put a towel or just put the trunk liner back in, sticking out so that no one closes this trunk, making it harder to get to the battery when we're done. All right, with the battery undone, we are going to get some covers out of our way, starting with the beauty cover. Let's pop that baby up and set it to the side. It's also worth noting that I undid the hood shocks and propped it up with the best hood shock of all, a broomstick, so that the hood is way more open, giving us way more light to work in. It'll also give you way more room to work in if you're doing this at home, and also will give you the best view, hopefully, of everything. Just with the beauty cover exposed, we have a great viewpoint of the valve cover, the fuel rail, the high pressure fuel pump, not the van nose solenoids, which are on the back. So again, regardless of which 4-part series you're watching, you may see some things that are missing, some things that are moved, and you know, some of those may not apply for your specific DIY, which we'll leave our magical editors to take care of. So don't be alarmed if you see a cover missing or a seal missing. PCB line up top, ridged on either side, pinch both sides. That'll help open up the little tabs holding this onto the valve cover. All right, got half of it started. I'm going to use a flathead to help free up the front half here, very gently. There we go. Here's a better view at that. You just press these 2 sides in, and that's going to unlock these two halves or widen them out so that it stops biting onto the valve cover. All right, we're going to continue on with the injector replacement as well as the valve cover removal. For the injectors, you really only need to get away with unplugging and removing one of the ignition coils. For the sake of today's video, we are going to zap all of them out, get them out of our way. It takes 2 seconds. And honestly, if it's your first time doing injectors on this platform, it might be better to be able to see exactly what you're doing. So getting out all the ignition coils is going to be the way. So let's start with that. We have 4 electrical connectors. We have 4 E8s to remove for the ignition coils. For this one, we have to remove this electrical connector here, which has to come out for our high pressure fuel pump anyways. All right, so what happened here is this should have just came unplugged. Then we could have came back and released this little center tab here from the back side to get this out. But nonetheless, this does have to come out, so that just saves us a step. But if yours hasn't been off before, it might be a little bit tighter to get out. All right, I'm gonna set these to the side. We have an 8mm ground for the fuel rail / wiring harness. And then we'll undo all the injectors plugs as well. We have an 8mm nut to release so that we can remove that ground on top of the fuel rail. We'll just get it started and then we'll go in by hand so we don't lose it in this oil abyss that is our valve cover. That baby's gonna come up and that's gonna release this bracket. With the bracket up enough, I'm gonna just thread the 8mm back on so I don't have to guess where it is later when I need it. If we need to remove it later, we can. All right, let's release the fuel injectors, electrical connectors. You know the drill. Gray release tab, push in, pull up. We're gonna do that 4 times. Might as well free up this one that's in our way, alligator clip on top of the valve cover. You know the drill. All right, we're just gonna continue doing the other 3 the same way. Hopefully we have better luck with these plugs. That, we have an alligator clip here holding this onto the valve cover. Let's release that. And then this baby can swing over totally out of our way. To get it from bouncing back, there's 2 little release tabs on top of here. Push those forward, lift up the bracket, or push them away, I'm sorry, away from the engine block. Lift up the bracket and that'll swing those over. And that's one less thing we have to worry about. We're gonna take our 17mm flared wrench, break these fittings free. There's gonna be some fuel that spills out, which is why we have shop towels in place. Just go nice and slowly as you release them. We have 8 E6 bolts to remove. First, those are gonna undo the injectors from the fuel rail. And then we have 4 E8s to separate the fuel rail from the top of the cylinder head. So let's zap these out. These are also only one-time use bolts per BMW. All right, now let's blast out the 4 E8s, holding that in. All right, at this point we have, I took some brake clean and just kind of cleaned the edges of the valve cover. Also sprayed down where the injectors go to kind of flood out some of the fuel that was in there in the dirt, even though we already blew this with air once. And I laid a pig mat over, like so, and hit it with compressed air again, just so that all the spray would catch or land on the pig mat itself, which did a pretty good job. Obviously, there's some over the valve cover, but in our case, we're gonna be replacing it. Otherwise, if I wasn't, I would clean it up as best as possible to make it look better. I threw some towels down the spark plug tubes, just to keep any crud from falling in there as well. Not that we couldn't blow it out. Now we're gonna get our removal tool set up. We have 4 studs that are gonna go into where the larger E8 bolts went. Those are gonna help support everything as we pull the injectors out. Again, we're using the CTA tool, so we're gonna undo the 10mm bolts through. These are ready to rock there. First, let's get our locks onto the injectors. To show you a nice close-up of how these work, I grabbed one of the new ones. You can see here, the tool is channeled to receive the flats on the fuel injector. So those are gonna go in like so. You're gonna rotate the tool 90 degrees, push down this little lock, and basically that's just gonna trap this in here from being able to come out. Pretty straightforward, pretty neat. So these are gonna be sitting in the car like so. So we're gonna go on, over the top, rotate, and then lock it. And then once we start threading the tool on, this will pull it up and keep it fully locked. So let's get these 4 on first. Feed our bolt and our stud through. There's magnets in the studs, these little sleeves that are gonna keep that from falling through. So we're just gonna use the holes that are appropriate for this setup. You can use these on a couple different B48, B38 alternatives. So what we're gonna do is then we're gonna feed this over and get the tool kind of lined up sitting on top of the fuel injectors. We're gonna turn the top pieces once we get them rested correctly. And those will start threading into that top of the tool that we inserted onto the injector. And that'll also help us line up the tools so that we can get these 10 mils started. All right, now that they all have a few threads on them, we're gonna gently draw those 10 mils in. We're not gonna crank them down. We just wanna snug them up a little bit. All right, we have our tool in. We have these top silver pieces that we thread on clockwise and start biting the top piece that we put on the injector. Sometimes it can start pulling them up. You can see this one's already loose. So it started pulling up the injector before we even turned the brass piece. With them all a little bit engaged and started, we're gonna snug down these tents very gently. And using our adjustables, these are righty loosey technically, they're reverse thread. So we can get our pliers on here, start turning those. And then that is gonna pull the injector up. Like I said, this one was already a little bit loose, so it's coming up no problem. Let's get the next one started. Here's our injector. One thing to note, the orientation of these when they go back in the car, electrical connector facing the front of the engine. 2, let's just say you were gonna put these back in for some reason. Probably not the worst idea to just number them so they can go back in their same home. Otherwise, we're gonna pull our tool off, up and turn. And then we're gonna be saving these collars from all of them. So currently in the car, they're kind of at an angle, which is why you can't get them out from the engine. But once they're out, we'll rotate them so they match the cutout. And then we'll clean them up and we'll reuse them for our new injectors. Let me pull these all out of the way and then we'll be ready to put some new injectors in and or pull off the valve cover, depending on what you're watching. We're back at the table. We're gonna join our fuel injectors to our fuel rail. Fuel rail is nice and clean. All the surfaces are free of any debris or anything like that. A couple things to note. Again, fuel injector connector. The electrical connector is gonna face towards the front of the pressure sensor. Secondly, all the hardware must be renewed. These are one-time use per BMW. There's a lot of 90-degree increments and stuff that's gonna be happening as we tighten these. So with that in order, the next thing to talk about is these little, I think BMW calls them bayonets. They're little collars, and that's what's gonna go around the fuel injector, rotate, and help keep that threaded up onto the fuel rail. On this updated version of the B48, these cast pieces do not have a little dowel on them. The older ones will have a little square dowel. Hopefully we can pop an image on that on the screen. If yours has that, that dowel needs to face inside or interior of the fuel rail. So if this had the little cast mark on it and it was out facing the top side of how we're working right now, that would be incorrect. So you would need to rotate it and make sure that it's facing inward as you're installing the injectors. In our case, these newer ones don't have it. They're totally smooth on both sides, so it's not something we have to worry about, but worth mentioning for those of you that may have that. We're gonna fit that onto the injector and then rotate it, and that's gonna lock it in. So let's get all 4 collars on. Now we'll get the injector up to our fuel rail. And we're gonna get our new bolts started by hand, and we're just gonna get them 1 or 2 threads in. That's about it, just so that it bites the collar around the injector. All right, with those situated, now we're going to use our spacer. And this is simply there to fit between the fuel injector and the fuel rail. And it's going to help set the length for what these need to be at before they go back into the car. So we're going to continue to just finger tighten. There's no sockets being used at all at this step. Strictly fingers only. I'm going to snug them up evenly. And you want it to be just clamping the little spacer tool. That's about how far you need to go. Once you're there, you can pull the tool out. So you can see right there, it's finger tight. The injector is semi-fixed or fixed with that spacer in. We're going to call that good. Wiggle that out, and then these should still have some play in them, which is what you want. So we're going to do that to the other 4. Now with that, this rail is ready to rock and roll. We're going to head back to the car. We're going to pop those in, and then our goal is to seat these into each of the bores and push them down evenly until there's no more give. At which point we will proceed with our 4 new mounting bolts, get those snugged up, and then we'll go from there. There's a ton of steps per BMW on how to snug these up. We're going to try to simplify them without causing any issues for install. So let's get to it. We have our work area nice and clean. One final vacuum before we pull out our little paper sleeves. Now we're going to feed this in, and our goal is to get it flush to the cylinder head just by pushing down on all the injectors evenly. That was pretty much it. They pretty much almost dropped all the way in, just a little press. And all our electrical connectors are in the right spot, exactly where we want them to be. All right, now we're gonna get our new hardware fed in by hand, and then we'll go from there. All right, with the fuel rail fully seated in, we're gonna hand finger tighten the 4 bolts that hold on the fuel rail. And these are addressed as bolt A, bolt B, bolt C, and bolt D per BMW. We're gonna grab our E8, and again, just finger snug these down. So now our next goal is to ensure that the fuel rail is fully flush onto the cylinder head. At this point, we're pretty close with how far it went down. The next required step would be to get a torque wrench, set it to 2 Newton meters. So basically in a cross, so again, A, D, B, and C. You're gonna tighten those in 90-degree intervals until they hit 2 Newton meters. Well, the reality is I don't have a torque wrench that does 2 Newton meters. It's almost nothing. So what we're gonna do is give them a quarter turn each, 90 degrees. And then we're gonna go in with our flashlight and we're gonna check to make sure that if that rail is seated all the way down to the top of the cylinder head. And if that looks good, we'll go from there. If it doesn't, we'll give it another round of 90-degree turns and then check once more. Just from what I could feel and what I can see here looking in with my flashlight, I am very confident this fuel rail is fully seated. We're gonna go back to A and see if there's any looseness in it. That's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. That's not going anywhere. And that's not going anywhere. So we're gonna take that as fully seated / 2 Newton meters achieved. Now we're gonna set our torque wrench to 5 Newton meters and repeat again and get this snugged up. All right, it's worth noting that BMW wants you to use a ratchet or torque wrench that cannot do this, that cannot wind back. It can only go in one direction. Again, that's not something we're equipped with here. That's not something we typically use, and you probably won't at home either. So the best thing I can suggest is just take your time, get your torque wrench set at that engagement position before you do anything, and then be very mindful about how you rotate it. Torque wrench is set to 5 Newton meters, and that same A, D, B, C pattern, we're gonna tighten all of them to 5 Newton meters. All right. Those are there. Those are good to rock and roll. With the rail secured for now, don't worry, we will have to undo it again later. We're gonna move on to the injector, so let's get ready for that. All right, next on our list, we're gonna hand tighten the fuel injector bolts down by hand, again, just with our fingers. So for that, we have our E6 Torx bit, We're gonna do them in pairs, right? So it's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we'll start with 1, 2, just snug them up by a hand, and then we'll go from there. Now we're gonna set our torque wrench, again, once more to 5 Newton meters. And in 90-degree increments, we're gonna rotate the bolts. So we're gonna do 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, in 90-degree turns until they achieve 5 Newton meters. Then we're gonna repeat the same steps on 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8. So again, bolt 1, 90 degrees, bolt 2, 90 degrees, bolt 1, 90 degrees, bolt until they hit 5 Newton meters. And that one's at 5, so we stop. You don't have to complete the 90 degrees if the torque wrench clicks. We're gonna do the same thing on the next 3 injectors. Let me zap through that real quickly, and then we'll pick it back up in a second. All right, with bolts 1 through 8 torqued down to 5 Newton meters, now they're all gonna require a 90-degree additional turn. BMW suggests marking the bolts with a paint pen. This one's kind of thick, so it's gonna be a little bit tough, but we're just gonna pretend here because we're gonna be able to just track our rotation of the ratchet. So the goal here is just to get all these vertical lines that I so carefully did and have them be totally horizontal. So again, 190-degree rotation for all 8. So let's do that next. I'm gonna keep using the torque wrench, how I have it set up, still set to 5 Newton meters with the E6 at the end, but I have an extension here to give me plenty of room so I don't hit anything on the engine bay. All right, at that point, those babies are snugged down. All our lines are horizontal. Again, use your imagination here with me, my good people. They all have a 90-degree turn. All right, we're not done yet. On to the next step. All right, for the next step, we're gonna be doing something similar to the 4 main bolts that hold our fuel rail in place. But first, we have to loosen them. So we're gonna go A, B, C, and D. We're gonna crack those free. Really about a quarter turn is all they need to be loosened up. And now, in the order of how we snugged them down before, A, D, B, and C, we are going to snug them up until we hit 5 Newton meters for each one. And we're gonna crank those in the same order, an additional 90 degrees until all our lines are horizontal. Well, if you made it this far, my good people, congratulations. Your fuel rail is officially installed along with your injectors. At this point, if you're just doing injectors, the fuel line between the high pressure fuel pump and the fuel line can go back in. We'll get our other fuel line hooked up, and then we can swing over our harness and start plugging in electrical connectors, pressure sensor, all that good stuff. While we have all the room in the world, we're gonna pop these ignition coils back in and get those babies situated. We're gonna plug in our fuel injectors, our ignition coils, and for what it's worth, we are currently working at the time of shooting this on sourcing these connectors, the housings separately, so that you can repair them if they break. So with that, be sure to stay tuned on fcpo.com if you wanna get those later on. We're gonna clip these 8 in, and then we'll secure the bracket on top of the intake manifold, just so we have wiggle room like this if we need it. I'm just gonna start at the rear injector and work my way forward. We have an 8 mil on top of the fuel rail, which we had threaded back in. Should have taken that off first, but that's okay. I can still get it out. That's gonna be for our ground. Just don't drop it, Mike. Let's get the ignition coils plugged back in. The wiring is basically lying exactly where we need it to go, which is nice. We can now secure this bracket back onto the bracket here. Wonderful. Pressure sensor can be clipped back in. Valve cover alligator clip right there. Speaking of alligator clips, let's clip in this harness here on the intake manifold. Intake manifold has these 2 stands coming off of it, right in front of the coolant line. That's a clip in there. And then alligator clip right there on the valve cover fin. All right, that's looking good. evap line can go on top of the valve cover. All right, at this point, all we really have left is our beauty cover. We're gonna keep that off until we start the car to make sure we have no leaks anywhere, especially in our fuel system. So with that, we're gonna reattach the battery in the trunk, get those two 10mm negative and positive terminals situated, and then we'll hop in and give her a start and just give it a minute, check for leaks, make sure we don't smell anything out of the ordinary. We should be good to go from there. All right, we'll start with our positive terminal. Get that baby fed over. We're just gonna snug up this 10mm. All right, we are leak-free. No fuel is coming from anywhere. The car is running great, and we're gonna call that a job well done. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave those in the comment section below. And if you like this DIY and you wanna see more like them, or perhaps you wanna check out the full valve cover series DIY or the other 2 parts in this 4-part series, then consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.